Here's a special important message.
Hello everyone, welcome to the first of a new series of We Are the Road Crew. My name is Stephen Hill. I hope you're well, hope you're doing all right, hope you've survived in our absence. It has been a little while since we've put one of these podcasts out. It has been a busy old time, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. I'm sure you've been very busy. I've been very busy. Ben and the guys over at Factory Studios, where we record this podcast, just kind of re-gearing up to, I guess, get back to normality after a weird couple of years. But hopefully we should have more podcasts for you to come over the next sort of few months or so. And we're starting off with this season talking to a gentleman named Cy Thomas. Now, Cy is an award-winning sound engineer. We talk about the kind of mechanics, about what it means in his job and what sound engineering actually entails, what it looks like, how he got into it. He's worked with a lot of big name artists, a lot of big name artists, everyone from Echo and the Bunnymen to Gary Numan to BB King to Kylie Minogue to Westlife. Lots of different rock acts he started off with, as we speak about kind of how he got into music and then kind of got so good at his job that he transitioned into doing work with absolutely massive pop acts, which led us to the kind of main crux of this episode, because Cy actually worked for a time period with Ariana Grande, and we are approaching the 5-year anniversary of the Manchester Arena attacks, which took place on the 22nd of May 2017 during an Ariana Grande concert. I'm sure you remember how shocking that event was. I'm sure you remember hearing about that, and just what an appalling, terrible, frightening thing that was. Cy was there that evening, and he's very, very, very kindly agreed to kind of speak candidly about that evening and his recollections of it. So I want to say a kind of personal thanks to him for doing that, because I mean, obviously it couldn't have been an easy thing to go through, let alone the sort of thing that you'd want to talk to people about, I would imagine. But we do go into that as the main kind of crux of the episode, so it's a little bit of a different vibe from the episodes that we usually do. Cy was also involved in the One Love concert on the 4th of June 2017, which was the concert which kind of raised funds and awareness for the aftermath of that attack. So we do talk about that a little bit as well, and he's got some really fascinating and unique takes on that entire time. Yeah, like I say, it's not really much more I can say about it, and that it is a really, really interesting chat with someone who's had to go through something which, none of us who go to a concert should ever have to go through. So without further ado, and with that kind of caveat that this is quite a serious episode, let's hand over to me talking to Cy Thomas.
Cy, thanks very much for being on the show. Much appreciated. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's start with the kind of the early days for you, because obviously you've been doing front of house sound engineering for decades now. How many is it? I think I said you're 29 years in my notes, so it's been a while, right?
Yeah, probably a bit more than that, in all honesty now. Yeah. I think we've definitely. I think we had the 30th anniversary last year. I think it was. But it's been a long time. But I've been involved with sound in one form or the other since I was 16. Or 15, 16, and so that's 40 years. I'll let you work out my age from that.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to ask. never ask to guess exactly how old they are. But so, first time you got into music, what was the thing? If we go right back before you were involved in a kind of professional capacity, what was the first thing that first drew you to music, and particularly live music, like maybe your first gig or something?
Probably, because the first gig I ever did was in, hang on, let me get the date right. I think it was 1986, I think it was, and I used to work at the Theatre Royal in Hanley, which is unfortunately sadly closed now, and Gary Numan came through on the Fury tour.
Lovely stuff.
Which I still have the pass in my drawer.
Nice.
In a little plastic film to keep it safe.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the shows that got me, and the other one was probably the 3 Degrees came through at the same theatre, and I ended up being a follow spot operator for that day on the tour. And I think that's where I kind of got the bug for music. I think that's where it really started. So, way back in the 80s. But also I was really into, I think the 80s was a great time as a teenager to grow with some really cool music. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, ABC, Simple Minds, all those kind of bands. And obviously, you had your U2s. I wasn't so much into those. I was more into the Simple Minds sort of thing. Okay. I guess that's really what grabbed me, and that's why I guess I just went into the industry. But how I got there was obviously another story.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so that's quite an interesting first couple of gigs to grab you. 3 Degrees and Gary Numan, they're fairly different artists, I would say.
Yeah.
And the 80s, like you mentioned, really brilliantly eclectic decade full of like great rock music. I'm really into the punk and the hardcore stuff from that time, and the thrash metal coming up, but then also like the sort of new wave and synth pop stuff. Everything was happening. Obviously Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, these huge stars. It was like when I look back on the 80s now, I do sort of go, God, it felt like every genre was brilliant in the 80s around that period. It was a really amazing melting pot of different styles.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that I think you're right. I think we had a generation that we'd had the 60s, we had 50s, 60s, 70s. When we can kind of say popular music really started to take its path. But I think when you got to the 80s, I think they took, at that point, everything from those different genres over the last 30 or 40 odd years and put it into music. As you say, there was some great crafted songs, but as you say, there was the punk, and there was the there was the rock, and then there was the new wave, and synth pop and all that. And I think that for me personally, maybe I'm just biased, but I still think that's probably one of the best eras of music that I think we've had. And I think we've had so many stars that came out of that, and that still are around today. And I'd be interested to see how that's going to translate with our new generation's artists in another 30 or 40 years. But then who knows? I probably won't be around then to find out.
I don't say that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you think that it feels like that was the biggest blockbuster era for massive stars, like absolutely massive stars. I mentioned kind of Prince and Michael Jackson, Madonna. Those three alone feel like as big as anything in music kind of ever got, really. You know what I mean? They're absolutely enormous. They're comparable to Elvis or Bowie, or it felt like every other decade kind of had like one of them. But we got loads of them in the 80s, all sort of mushed in together.
100%, and it'd be interesting. I do say to some people, I said when we got to the millennium, we turned to the millennium. I said when the industry really changed, and there was a lot of pressure on record companies because of loss of sales and this, that, and the other. The thing that's intrigued me, I say to people, please name me in 2000 onwards. Name me 10 top acts massive acts that were as big as they were in the 80s, other than Coldplay and things like that. Name them. Everybody goes, yeah, you're right, it's really hard. And then you go to the 80s, name them, they can just list them off. It's just, so I'm quite intrigued to see where it's going. I'm not saying there aren't some supergroups out, of course there are, but I don't feel like it was then. No, I agree. I've only mentioned 3, but you could chuck in Springsteen and Janet Jackson and Whitney Houston and all that. It just goes and goes, doesn't it? Does, it really, really does. It really does. So that's your kind of what you grew up with, kind of got you the music bug. How did that then translate into you actually working within the music industry? How did you go about getting into that, and where did you kind of get your start? Well, I have to go back a little bit before music, back to theatre. Right, okay. When I was 16, left school like everybody, and decided I was going to go on my little path of trying to get into the industry. But I was more on the broadcasting side, so I went basically into commercial radio, and was making adverts and sound effects when I was 16 for adverts, for commercial radio up in Stoke-on-Trent. And off the back of that, I managed to get a job as a technical operator at the BBC, part-time, on a freelance basis, around about the same time. And this led into the theatre, which I basically had 2 jobs at the same time. I was doing 3 things at once. I was studying, and then I was doing BBC local radio, and I was doing working in local theatre. And it was always the same, bunch of sound gear. No one's interested in it because they all want to do lights and all the nice stuff. And we basically just had it was actually at the time it was brand new. It was an old Soundcraft 800B that was bought for the theatre because it was all this whole theatre. It was a beautiful theatre, but it worked on trying to just get as much money from the community to build it back up again. And obviously investors and stuff like that. So we had some little old court speakers and some old H&H amplifiers and Soundcraft 800B and a bunch of rifle mics and foot mics, and no one ever wanted to do the sound. So I'll do that. So I volunteered, and I learned the hard way what not to do, and ended up doing a lot of theatre sound. But then as time went by, I basically got offered a full-time job with the BBC down at Pebble Mill as a trainee audio engineer, and turned it down. The guy who offered the job to me basically rang up my mum and said, "Is your son nuts? We don't give these away." And Mum said, "Do you want this? Why are you not taking this? This is a golden opportunity." And it was a golden opportunity. Yeah. But no, I didn't take it because I thought I wanted to go to university like all my friends, and
Was that what it was?
Yeah, I wanted to go to university and party a little bit and have some fun.
Okay, and, well, makes sense.
I'd kind of been dabbling with a bit of theatre, a bit of broadcasting, but I still wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. I kind of enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure. I thought I wanted something a bit more exciting. I really liked the theatre side of things, but the problem with theatre was it was the money. It was just sadly it was very poor, but great part of my life. So I trolleyed off to university, and while I was in university, I discovered the old sound system in the student union cupboard that no one used, and kind of got it all up and running again. Right. Some beaten up old H&H boxes, and terrible separate. It was an awful system, and it was just the worst. Yeah. And but made it work, and did a few sort of like folk nights and stuff like that. And then for the better shows, student union used to bring in a local sound company that were based out of Hollandbourne in Kent, and used to use all the old Hill systems, Malcolm Hill audio speakers, which were big, heavy old speakers. But they were right; they sounded pretty good. Yeah. And one day I'm in the student union, and the boss of the company is like, started chatting with him and had a few too many beers, and I used to lean over the board and start fiddling with the knobs while he was mixing. Yeah, you just wouldn't do that anymore now. But it's like, what does this do? Yeah. And he used to laugh and say, get away. And then one day he said, "Oh, we're so sick of you. Come and do a load-in with us. We'll soon find out what you're made of." Yeah. So I went and did a load-in, and I got £10. And I said, "Can I have some more?" And he went, "We thought this would get rid of you." And funny thing, I was just talking to that guy today on the phone, and we're still friends after all these years. And that's how it really started. And then that obviously got me interested, and then my partying subsided, because then every Friday, Saturday, or actually every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'd do the art college, and then I'd do the University of Kent, and then probably Christchurch, where I went, there'd be bands on, so I'd go and mix the bands in the student union. And everybody thought I was mad. They thought, well, he's not going to make any money out of this. And
here we are. Yeah.
Sat here talking about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of, because I've always been into, I mean, I'd like to think that I've got a fairly good ear for what music should sound like when I listen to an album, and I go, well, actually the guitars are a bit loud. But, I'd say it's probably compared to someone like yourself, it's probably a fairly rudimentary understanding of how those things get mixed. How quickly, do you feel like you're kind of born with an ear for that stuff? Or did you think after a while you pick, I mean, I'm sure you pick it up more and more, but how quickly could you tell, right, that sounds good and that's wrong, and there's me able to pinpoint the exact reason why it doesn't sound great? That's
a really, really, really good question. And I think you probably have an understanding. I mean, I played instruments, and and I played violin and keyboards and drums terribly, but I got a general understanding of reading of music and things like that, and obviously hearing things. So I think that's some of the background, but I think the other background is you then need to interpret that, which is what you're saying. Well, that interpretation comes with really understanding audio and the skill set of working that. Personally, I think the best engineers are not the technical engineers or the musical engineers. I think they're a mixture of both musical and technical engineers. You know, I think they manage to, if they can manage to read both, if that makes sense, and bring them together, then I think that's what I think makes a good sound engineer. And yeah, it is about, sometimes we can say it's repetitive in some respects, but that's like any jobs. But I think the thing is with music and, you know, being a sound engineer is it's always flowing. You know, as I teach, you know, young people ask me, you know, how do I deal with sound? I said, imagine sound is like water. It always keeps flowing. So there's no fixed ways of doing it. It is about how you interpret the flow of that water. So
it's a very poetic way to put it, I have to say.
Yeah, it probably is, but I think it's a good way of putting it. I think it kind of gives people, you know, when I say that to people, they think, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to them. Yeah. And then they're not trying to always find, you know, sometimes when people are being too technical about it, they miss the flow. Does that make sense?
Well, that appeals to me a lot because I am definitely someone who thinks about music much more in the kind of, oh, this is an artistic, and it, you know, obviously all music is it's an art form, and when you think, oh, it's like flowing water, that appeals much more to that kind of, like I say, poetic sense of it being an artistry rather than it being a kind of, because I've always gone like, I'm not sure I could think about music in the, like in my head, I'm like, that would be a really mechanical way to try and sort of think about music, and that actually makes much more, that appeals to me more as an idea of approaching making things sound good.
And I think, in all honesty, the reason I think like that is because I'm not, you know, I can read music, but I'm not like an expert at reading music, you know, and I think I know enough about, you know, the notes and stuff like that without being in too depth about it. But also, you know, there's elements of sound that I know really well, you know, and, you know, obviously I know some of it really in depth as well, but some of the stuff that you learn years and years ago, the physics of it, you start to tuck it away a little bit and just bring the things that are usable from that. Does that make sense? Yeah. And you take the usable from that and the usable from the music, and then you put them together. So you know, that's you know, that's experience. Yeah. That to me is what experience is.
That's a sort of left brain, right brain coming together thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. You know. So when did this skill set that you'd been learning actually fully translate into, and how did it fully translate into a full-time career? At what point did you go, oh, this is now my career?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I went to after I'd finished university, I came out in 91, and I've never done anything else since. I mean, it was hard in the early years, you know, I was making, you know, terrible money, but I've never ever worked for anybody other than myself. So, you know, yes, it's been 31 years now, nearly, just, you know, being at it and just getting on with it and finding different paths and picking up bits of work here and bits of work there. And, you know, your question is, when did I realise that was something I was good at? Well, that took time. Yeah. You know, there were times when it was, I get an amazing sound and go, oh yeah, I know this is good. I know this is good. You know, when you go, oh yeah, this is it. It's, you know, and then suddenly you go, then you go to the next game. Why can I not be consistent? What am I doing wrong? And I think that as a young engineer, I think it takes time to become a consistent engineer and have the ability to produce the same result everywhere in every venue. And that's the skill. And that doesn't come, you know, despite what anybody says, it does not come to you just like that. You know, you can read every book and study for all those years, and you can go and do, you know, loads and loads of gigs, and you still don't find the consistency. So I think that, personally, I don't think I became a good sound engineer until, I don't know, probably 10 years after I left university. Right. I don't think so. But the thing is, I always felt like that. I always felt like I needed to learn more before I said I was a good sound engineer. Whereas I think some people say they're good sound engineers before they've learnt enough. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being harsh on myself or harsh on them. I don't know. Is the answer to that one.
Good to have that you know, like, you know, that constant want to be better. What was it? Jamie Justice said, "Satisfaction is the death of desire." It's a Hatebreed lyric, but you know, it's always to try and better yourself is always a good thing, I think. Yeah,
you know, and then I think as a good friend of mine, Toby Francis, said to me one day, you know, we were speaking on the phone, and I'd just been, you know, I'd done a bunch of world tours back to back, and I'd had that consistency where I was picking up, you know, one good act after the next. And he said to me one day, says, "Isn't it really nice when you get a flow of of really big shows in a row, doesn't it give you the confidence to realise, actually, I might be quite good at this?
Yeah.
But I think until you get that run of shows, I think a lot of good sound engineers, being the nature of what we are, have certain amounts of doubt. You know, you can't be a good sound engineer without having some doubt. That's what drives you.
Let's talk about a few of the people that you have worked with, who I quite like. Well, let's start with Echo and the Bunnymen. You work with Echo and the Bunnymen.
Yeah.
I love Echo and the Bunnymen.
Right.
A lot. And I think they are one of the kind of great lost bands of that era that we were talking about. Everyone goes on about like U2, who I love as well. The Cure, who I also love as well. You know, the Smiths and those sort of bands. Don't feel like people talk about Echo and the Bunnymen so much these days, and I think that is a crying shame, hence why I wanted to start with them.
40th anniversary as well this year, isn't it?
It is. They played, I had to go to a gig recently to review for a magazine that I write for, and someone walked past me and they were going, I thought they were coming to the gig I was going to. They were going up the road to watch Echo and the Bunnymen, and I felt incredibly jealous. I nearly was like, I know I'm getting paid for this, but I want to go up the road and watch Echo and the Bunnymen. Anyway, what was that like? When did you work with them, and how was that for you?
It was 1997, I think it would have been, and they released that album.
Comeback.
Yeah, that's it, Evergreen, the album Evergreen.
Yeah.
And I was a young technician at Britannia Row, when they were in Wandsworth. And I'd started doing a bit more mixing. I was doing a lot of monitors and stuff like that. I got a call from, I'd been out on a tour looking after a chap called Dave Brooks, who has now been a friend now for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
And he rang me up and said, the Bunnymen are looking for a monitor engineer. I went, and that was the point where I was going, I really don't want to do monitors anymore. That was the turning point about 97 when I sort of walked away from, you know. So he says, I'm going to put you in touch with the manager. So I gets this call from the manager. He says, will you come and do monitor? I went, no, but if you offer me the front of the house, I'd be interested. Thinking, well, I was no way I was going to do monitors. Just said, no, I just don't want to do it. And he says, well, as it happens, we're looking for that position as well. And I went, oh, okay. And, you know, I didn't really have a CV as such at the time, but I'd got a lot of people who knew of my skill set who worked at Brit Row and put a good word in for me, and I'd been out on quite a lot of large tours at the time as a, you know, babysitter, as we used to call them those days, now systems engineers. They have nicer titles than what we were. So that's why I ended up there, and my first show was in New York.
Wow.
Yeah, so I literally never met the band, and I flew out to New York, and I remember being, you know, landing in JFK, and it was JFK, and sitting there going, oh my God, I'm in the Big Apple, I'm on my own, and just sort of like getting in a cab and going into the middle of Times Square, because we had a hotel, it was just off Times Square. I wish I could remember the name of the place, but it was one of those typical sort of 80s hotels with the, you know, the big sort of hub of activity in the foyer, and walked in. I went to the bar to the left, and I think I got into the bar about 11 o'clock at night, and that's when I bumped into Mac and the manager, and I think we all got drunk.
Nice. I mean, Ian McCulloch is such a great character. I mean, that must have been, you know, in terms of, again, I think that in terms of sort of great rock and roll frontmen and great kind of storytellers and just brilliant presences, and like some of the quotes that he's come out with over the years about, you know, he's got that, he's like kind of like a post-punk Liam Gallagher, I always think of him as, because he's got that kind of swagger about him.
I mean, one thing I did like about the band is when they were on form, they were a truly amazing band. Yeah. When they were really on form, when it all came together, they were truly amazing. But, you know, there are times when you're going, oh, okay, this is an interesting gig. But that's like anything of that kind of, you know, as you say, there was an element of, I mean, how would you describe their music? There was an element of punk in there as well, to a certain extent.
Yeah, they had
that attitude a little bit.
Yeah,
you know, to the show was a little bit like that sometimes. You know, we're just going to go out there and go for it and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I saw them around that time, and I was surprised because, you know, I'd listened to their music without really knowing that much about them as a band, and then went to see them, and I was surprised at how confrontational the gig was. It was very confrontational, and Ian McCulloch was quite a kind of aggressive stage presence. And I was like, oh, they've got
that's what I was saying. That was
songs.
the punk element to it that I felt like, but obviously the music was very different. You know, Will Sargent, you know, he was great, and then they were all great. And then I made really good friends with the drummer, Michael Lee, who sadly passed away. Yeah. And I mean, what a power force he was for the band. I mean, you know, obviously with what happened to Pete DeFreitas, so you know, they had to, you know, that's what, you know, obviously that's why Michael was there. And I remember some really good memories, actually. One of the most memorable gigs for me was Washington Stadium, and we were doing like the radio festival run through America with the Bunnymen. Basically, I got to this radio, it was like 65,000 people in this arena, you know, and at the back of the arena, I can remember it clear as day. At the back, I decided to walk around the whole arena just to listen to the system and see what's going on, get a vibe. I used to do that all the time just to get a feel for who my audience was. Yeah. I'm sat at the back going, there's quite a lot of sort of like, you know, older people up here, and it's like, you know, it's kind of strange for a kind of festival like this. It's like a young festival, and it was, you know, those sort of festivals, they had almost kind of like two headlines: the afternoon headline, the late afternoon headline before the evening sort of shows started. So you'd have like a late afternoon big act before they then went into the evening performances or evening shows. I think Beck was on that bill as well, and I remember, you know, there was the mosh pit down the bottom, and all the kids were going crazy for all these young bands all day, you know. Yeah. And I thought, this is going to be interesting. Yeah. So anyway, the Bunnymen came. I think we were on at 5:00, and we hit the first beat. I mean, it was proper like, you know, the PA came alive, and I remember the systems engineer at the time going, "Oh my God, you know, what's going on here?" You know, it's like lots of red lights, but nothing like stuck in the red. Just everything was just perfect. It was one of those straight out the gate perfect gigs. And I looked around, and the mosh pit were like all just looking around like this. And I heard this roar from the back of the stadium, and looked around, and the back of the stadium erupted. And I went, okay, so that's the audience up there. Yeah. And then the next thing you know, the kids thought, well, if they're having that, we're having that. And the next thing was 65,000 people pogoing up and down this stadium. And a good friend of mine came up to me after the show. Again, this Dave Brooks, who used to work for MSI at the time, he said, "You are nuts." I said, "Why?" He said, "That's the best sound we had in here all day." He said, "But it was crazy. Everything was just clipping our amps all day." And we said, we're all sitting there going, staring at them. He said it's one of the loudest things we'd ever heard, but it was really good. It wasn't like a horrible loud. He said it was really like made the system work for its money. Yeah. And we had a great gig. That's a good memory, things like that. Yeah, yeah. When they hit a good show, it was amazing. Yeah. I've always wondered what it was. I mean, I think we ask, every time we get someone in to do with sound here, I'm always like, because outdoor, I mean, obviously different venues, notoriously, there are venues that have notoriously, unmanageable acoustics. And I always feel like outdoors, to me, outdoors with a band like the Bunnymen, who, you know, a lot of kind of floaty chords and a lot of, you know, airy, a lot of kind of air between. I would sort of go, God, that must be quite hard to capture the sort of nuance of how they sound in such a large venue. Is outdoors and in festival fields and in stadiums and stuff, like, how much more of a challenge is it to get those kind of bands right in that sort of environment? You know, it's kind of interesting this how a lot of people, you know, ask that question about, you know, outdoors, I think it could be worse. I mean, in some respects it's the easiest gig in the world doing it outdoors, because of the you know, obviously the stadium's different, but if it's outdoor in a big field, there's no reflections. But in saying that, you are reliant on having enough PA, and that can be the downfall. I mean, if there's enough sound system and it's deployed properly and you've got enough power, you can get some really, really good results. But, you know, stadiums, they have some pretty nasty reflections to stadiums, and they can be hard work. But I don't know, I've never personally found any of those environments particularly I don't know. I've not found them over challenging to me. Maybe that's just because I think I'm able to hone in and ignore what else is going on out. I think that's the key, is being able to hone in on my mix and almost filter out all the other nonsense that's going on. But again, that's a skill set you learn over the years of how to focus on things. So yeah, I mean, I have done gigs in Wembley which have been particularly interesting, where you mix positions off centre and you can't really hear the PA. That can be hard work. It's all about where you're positioned as well.
Right. Okay.
If you're in the right place and get everything perfect, then it should be fine. But we're not always lucky to have all those things today, because there are a lot of other things to consider. There's lights, there's video, there's staging, so we have to kind of fit into all those parameters.
I also wanted to ask you about working with Moby as well.
Oh, I mean, that's a long time ago.
Right.
Well, now I'm going to have to scratch around on that one. It was Reading Festival. Can't remember what year it would have been. Well, actually, probably around about... It would have been before the Bunnymen, so it would have been probably 95, somewhere around there, I'm guessing.
So there's obviously early kind of techno Moby.
Yeah.
And then he sort of went punk for a bit,
That's
didn't
it.
he?
That's the
so
bit
you
I
went
did.
on the Animal... Yeah, that's good, because that's the most... I am familiar with Moby, because that's the only album of his I ever bought, was the kind of punk album. But that was an interesting stylistic deviation for him, which he then deviated from again. Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I really, really enjoyed working for Moby, and the only reason I didn't is I moved on to do the Lighthouse Family, doing monitors. At the time when I was being a monitor engineer, I remember he came through on Reading Festival, and I was the monitor engineer for the main stage at the time. Moby came through, and I'm sort of looking around where his monitor engineer is, and gets a little tap on the shoulder from the tour manager, a chap called Ali McMordy. And he said to me, you're doing monitors? I went, oh, you don't have monitors? No. I said, well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? He said, oh, it'll be fine. He said, I'll see you out there. Me thinking, see you out there? He turns off stage playing bass, does the tour manager, over on stage right. And I'm looking and going, you just... well, anyway, so we did the gig, and he came up to me after the show and said, what are you doing for the next 6 months? I said, looks like I'm working for you guys. And he went, yeah. He said, you're the best monitor engineer we've had in God knows how long, and do you want the gig? I went, yeah, great. So, and it was that whole sort of, I forgot what the album was called now.
Animal Rights.
Animal Rights was it. Yeah. All I remember is Moby coming over to me, a couple of shows later, and he used to wear foam earplugs, the big yellow ones, and he took them out. He says, oh, my ears are ringing. I went, oh, do you want to turn it over? He said, no, just turn it up, I want more. And I thought, okay. And it was in the days when we were all like on wedges, and the skill set was how loud you could get those wedges without them feeding back. And I ended up being with them for about 6 months. I could have carried on, but then I went on to do the Lighthouse Family.
That's quite a shame, because maybe he was touring with Soundgarden around that time.
That's right. I did that tour.
Okay,
I was because I went and did monitors on that tour. Yeah.
I was going to go to that, but I was young, and I was too scared to go to Brixton because I was from the country, and I was like, I can't go to Brixton. I'm scared of the big city. Yeah. So I didn't go, and I'm gutted, because that was in Soundgarden split up soon after, and I thought that would have been a really good gig. Anyway, that says more about me and my cowardice as a young man rather than anything to do with your story. So let's just move on from that immediately.
Yeah, but I remember that gig at Brixton really, really well.
How was it?
It was brilliant. I remember it. It's clear as that, because I remember it was a Showco account, and I remember the gear coming in. It was racks of gear. I wish I could remember the name of the monitor engineer for Soundgarden, because he was such a nice guy, and he helped me lots and lots. With Moby, learnt a few tricks off of the trade as well that made my gig better. And I wish I could remember his name. It's so annoying. When you see a face but you can't remember who it was.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I think that was probably one of the last gigs I did for Moby, I think, around. That's why I kind of remember it.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I look back on it now thinking, why did I leave? But you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, quite a stylistic deviation from Moby in his punk period with Soundgarden to the Lighthouse Family. That is quite that's range that you've got there.
Yeah. Well, it didn't do me any harm in the end, because I think that's I think one thing I think I'm good at is versatility. I think I'm very, I think I've got the ability to kind of drop into any genre of music, and not, and I think that's because I've had such diversity of working with different artists. You
definitely have. We should talk about a few. I mean, I want to mention very, very quickly. There's a few. BB King is someone who my mum grew up listening to the blues a lot. BB King is a legendary character. Were you a fan? And I mean, he's somebody that when I look at that list and I'm like, he feels like some sort of god.
He was great
to me. Do you know what I mean?
He was great. It was one of those. I only did one UK European tour, because that's how that outfit operates. They pick up engineers in the territories, because he comes along, plugs in the guitar and sits down and plays. It's amazing, and the band just come down, sit down and play, and whatever is given to them by monitors, they're happy to take. And it was the same. At the time it was a Capital Sound account on that particular tour, and I was doing some work for Capital at the time, and the room said, can you go out and do BB King? I went, great, yeah, of course I will.
Yeah.
And we went all the way around the UK. I can't remember where I was, but we did end up doing the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah.
And talking of sound, that was notorious in the days before the install.
Right. Okay.
And I remember I was still quite a young engineer then, and it was the big gig that was on the bucket list.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember that show really, really well. And all I remember going is, when you go, I know this sounds good. That was the one where I went, I've done a good job in here, because you never knew what was going to happen in there. But the skill was always just keep the level down, and and mix the band as opposed to trying to blast everything. You just can't do that in the Royal Albert Hall. And I just remember, because it was that type of audience, they weren't into it being loud. They just wanted to hear quality.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting there and thinking, this guitar sounds great.
I mean, that feels like the kind of the beautiful simplicity of someone like BB King.
100%.
Feels like it's maybe even harder to achieve that to the level that it needs to be than it would do if something's very kind of complex, and like I was talking about the nuance in Echo and the Bunnymen. But I think hearing somebody who's just a kind of voice and guitar and a backbeat behind them, but having that sound absolutely perfect, that almost feels like it's maybe deceptively, it's so simple, it's kind of deceptively simple, like it was actually probably very difficult to achieve. Yeah,
because like you say, it's his playing is just amazing, and each fret and each note is very clear because of the way he plays. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those places that I thought lent itself really well to that particular concert. And I remember it was at that particular point when we did that show, apparently it was the most sold out the Royal Albert Hall had ever been in years. I mean, they'd gone all the way to the rafters, the very top row, which they didn't used to do.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely rammed, because they were saying it was going to be his last tour. Well, it wasn't.
No, it went on for a while.
It went on for a while.
Yeah, yeah. What's the different challenges between doing someone like BB King and doing someone like Kylie Minogue, who I know you've done, who again, in a very different type of music, is an icon in her own right? That must have been exciting to work with Kylie.
It was, yeah, and she, she's lovely. Well, I mean, the thing is, you're talking about something that's very instrumental, to something that's more about the vocal and the pop tune, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The two very different challenges. I mean, obviously, once you're doing, when you're doing pop music, it's like the vocal. It has to be out there. It's what makes a pop show. It's they want to hear all the, the shouting and the singing and that's key. I mean, it's probably in some respects can get a lot more dynamic, because people are obviously dancing as well. So the vocal mic is moving all over the place. So those are some of the challenges, and also having thrusts and things like that where the artist moves out onto. Those are your challenges about just getting the maximum amount of clean vocal before feedback. Whereas something like BB King's very static. Once he's positioned, once his mic's set, you're pretty much set for the gig. So you're just really getting into the mix. I think, but doing pop stuff, there's a lot of things to take into account. There's a lot of moving parts, and I think is probably the most underrated genre to mix. It's probably the hardest genre of any to mix,
really,
in my opinion, because there's so much, there's so much expectation about it being like the record. More than ever. It's really really produced. Obviously, as I say, there's thrust, people moving in front of the PA. Getting the vocal loud enough, clean enough. Lots of ambient noise. Did
Kylie have a full band with her? Was it a kind of live band?
I did Yes, I mean, basically, a lot of the stuff in the early days was playback stuff, but then all the TVs and promotional stuff was with a band.
Because that, again, I think in terms of players as well, in terms of people actually playing those bands, the people who play in those pop bands are some of the best. People go, it's easy, isn't it, pop music? But they're the best musicians in the world, those people, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. As I say, I think the whole genre gets sometimes a little bit dismissed, and there's a reason why I think you see a lot of big named engineers doing pop. I think there's a reason for that, because I think it can be quite challenging. But there's some great rewards to be had from it as well.
Presumably, if you want to reach the kind of the zenith, the kind of A game of your profession, those are the kind of artists that you're going to be wanting to work with. I mean, it's not just Kylie. Looking at it now, Sam Smith, Westlife, Halsey, and obviously Ariana Grande, which we'll talk about in a second. Those are huge artists playing to the absolute worldwide superstars, and it makes sense that you're going to surely want to work with the very best in the business if you want to reach the pinnacle of your career, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of it is. I was, in a lot of respects, I've been very lucky to have known. Took a journey that I met some great people on that journey. And a lot of the stuff with regards to a lot of the stuff that I started doing with pop was because I did a lot of the X Factor stuff, and or pick up an act off the X Factor or whatever, and that would lead on to other things. And I mean, there was a period where I remember there was a period over 10 years, between Kylie and that, where I was doing a whole mix of stuff, and not. It wasn't so much. You didn't seem to do, low. You seemed to just, back to back of different tours with different artists. You'd do a couple of months on one artist, then a couple of months on another artist, because just the way that pop machine used to turn over. I think it's only really once you started to move, into 2008, 10, somewhere around there. I think we started to see a lot of what I call big named pop artists coming out of the United Kingdom, whereas all those big name pop artists were generally coming out of America, which is why they had all those long big tours. So and I think that kind of started around Jessie J. Really, she became global superstar, and that's when I started to see me doing all these bigger world tours, and then obviously that went on to Sam. Yeah, the rest is history, because where are we now? 2022. 14 years now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is 14 years.
Yeah, well, look at that.
14 years. They fly by, don't they?
Yeah.
Speaking of time flying by, I mean, this is really something that we kind of have to talk about, I think, even though it is probably a very difficult thing to talk about. We're looking at 5 years. So you were working with Ariana Grande. We're coming up to 5 years since the that evening at the Manchester Arena during the Ariana Grande concert, which I believe you were there at that night. It seems completely unfathomable that you would go out to a gig to watch a pop artist, to have enjoy a night out, and then something like that would happen. Do you have any kind of recollections of that evening that you're willing to kind of share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I always, I think it's one of those things that I don't think you fully comprehend, even years later. I do have one memory. I remember it really, really clearly. I remember, obviously the explosion that happened, and heard it, and we kind of, between me and my systems engineer, we sort of looked at each other and said, "Yeah, we know what that is." It was very obvious to us what it was. But the one thing I do remember really clearly, I do remember there was a mum and a daughter and someone from, I think it was maybe St John's Ambulance or something like that. There's all the pandemonium going on and people running all over the place. And all you can do, you can't help everybody. All you can do is help someone.
Yeah.
And I remember in the pandemonium, like, it was just outside my front of house position. There was this young girl, and she was just like frozen, like absolutely like petrified. I mean, just hysterical. And the mum was almost as bad, trying to calm her down. And the St John's Ambulance guy was just, you could see he was like not really getting anywhere, because he's obviously trying to do the same thing, deal with one person, but I just stepped out and said, come on, come in. I sat her on the box and I said to my systems engineer, grab some chocolates, grab some set lists, grab anything you've got. And I said, what's your name? And I can't remember her name to this day. All I can remember is this young redhead girl. And I said to her, do you have a great concert? Trying to take her mind. She says, yeah, it was brilliant. I said, here, there's a set list here. Here, eat some chocolate, drink some water. Everything's going to be okay. And I said, Mum, come here, Mum. And I said, listen to everything I'm telling you. Go straight down there, turn left and go out that door there. You're going to be fine. And to this day, I have no idea who that person is, who she was, but all I know is she got out the door. And that to me was important.
Yeah.
And you can't help everybody. And to me, it was like, I guess the whole thing is, as you just said earlier, why did something like that happen at that sort of event? It's just, as you say, it's unfathomable. Doesn't make any sense.
It's completely, unfathomable. I mean, obviously, there's been things that have happened at concerts before. The Bataclan as well, that happened during the Eagles of Death Metal show. I think we've spoken to people about that previously as well. And it's just something that, I mean, no matter how many times it is, and then, you pray that something like that will never happen again. But still, I don't think no matter how many times it did or was happening, nothing could ever prepare you for that. Like, for you, going into your job to just make a concert of a pop star sound good for a load of people, you must have never thought you would be involved in a situation like that.
No,
ever.
No, of course not. And there are people who left the industry because of it. There are people who said, I didn't get into this to be shot up and blown up and things like that. And it's like we're trying to entertain people, we're trying to bring happiness to people. That's what we're trying to do. And it's like, it is a there are a lot of risks in anything, but we do have a lot of risks these days, I think, in what we do. And it's like, and we're all a lot more cautious because of it. I mean, because I remember the explosion was to my left ear, because I remember it, and I remember the whole roof ran, and I still get a bit jumpy if someone drops something behind me to the left of me. And I wasn't out there, but I wasn't that far away from it, and it does. You think with time it would get better, but in some respects it doesn't. In some respects you go, whew, it never goes away from you, but you do learn to deal with it.
Were you, when you say that people have left the industry because of it, I mean, was that ever a consideration for you at all? Did you ever think, because it's the getting back on the horse, isn't it? It's the doing the next. I imagine the first gig after doing that must have been really difficult.
Well, the thing is, we got back on the horse. One Love Manchester was put together, and that was it. I mean, it's like, for me, it was a lot easier because I was able to go home. A lot of the American crew weren't. It was difficult for them because obviously they, it's everything's off, and they go to the back. Like, we're going to just put you all in the hotel, and then we'll assess what's going on, and we'll take it from there. But obviously off the back of that came, we're going to do the charity event in Manchester. So didn't really get a lot of time to really think about it, because I ended up then going into rehearsals at Wembley Arena. We went to the arena and we put it together, and we ended up rehearsing that for it wasn't that long, probably less than a week, 5 days, something like that. We went into Wembley Arena, and it was like, we were really in the thick of it to make this happen, because a lot of acts obviously signed up to come on to the bill. There's a lot of artists, a lot of management, a lot of other band engineers who, obviously want to be involved, but that's not the way we ran it. In the end, I ended up mixing all the bands and on our setup, which obviously had been designed and built for that tour. So we had to kind of tear it all to bits and make it all work. So, I mean, I think, when the actual event happened, that's when, we got some emotion. You get emotional about it, because suddenly you stood there going, wow.
Yeah.
That you literally, it's like when you're stood in front of a concert for 5 hours mixing all these different acts, and you then realise what it's for, because you see, guys backstage, the police backstage, with some pretty serious weaponry walking around, guarding and watching that. It makes you think. I think that definitely emotions on the day for sure, and as I say, there's much more to the story, on the day in question, but it's not really something I think is fair to talk about. I can only say about a particular incident that stuck with me, and that young kid will always stick with me for the rest of my life. Don't know who they are, but as long as they're all right, I don't care.
Yeah, that's just amazing, like insane couple of weeks for you.
It was, and but I think a lot of good came out of it, and I think it was the right thing to do. I think that it was, I think it was an amazing production. I think it was very well put together. I think it came across really well. I think the broadcast aspect of it was amazing. I think it was a really, really good event.
Yeah, I mean, I did watch it on TV. I do remember watching it on TV actually, and it's sometimes hard, I think, for TV to feel like that feeling of being in a crowd.
Yeah, for sure,
is difficult to replicate when you're sat at home on your sofa watching it.
Of course,
but there was so many moments where on that night, I mean, obviously, liking type of music, I like Liam Gallagher coming out and doing Live Forever in Manchester with Coldplay was one that I do remember thinking, cool, that's got the sort of hairs going on the back of your neck up a little bit. But in general, just the way they say the broadcast of it, seeing those kids there and seeing the people that had come along and seeing how emotional everyone got. I mean, if that's how I felt sitting on the sofa watching it, the day for you must have been like what you've already said, the kind of heightened emotional state that you must have been in was
and also the people around that are working with you. I mean, you as the front of house engineer, you have a certain responsibility to your audio crew. You have a certain, essentially you're the head of that audio department. So, you find the crew that had been on the tour with, they worked really, really hard, but I think it was emotionally quite hard for some of them. And, you have to be seen to support that. You've got to be strong for them as well. Because yes, I mean, people say, oh, it's just entertainment, but there are a lot of emotions that flow when you put something like that together, because especially when all the majority of the crew that were on that were all the crew that came off the tour. So there was a lot of emotions for them as well.
What did you do in the aftermath of that? I mean, did you take any time off to just have a holiday or get away? Because like I say, having it happen, trying to process it, and then almost immediately, like you say, you're throwing yourself into this big concert. Once that ended, I can imagine that would have been something that would have felt like a very heavy thing to sort of have to go through. And then what was your kind of aftermath of it for you?
Well, the aftermath, actually, we basically carried on with South America.
Right.
There was obviously that was a little bit of downtime. I think it was a couple of weeks we had. I went home for a couple of weeks, and then we picked up and went out to South America. So we ended up doing the South America tour, and everything just kind of carried on. I mean, obviously it was different because the security situation totally changed wherever we went, which is kind of understandable. And but in all fairness, it was, and then we did some stuff in China as well, and we did some stuff in Australia. But it was different. But funnily enough, there was a lot of, it was a very tight crew. It was a tight crew before that, but it was an even tighter crew after that. And we just carried on, and I think I carried on into September, and that was the end of that world tour.
Right.
And then we all went home.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's something, I guess that is something that will bond people for,
Oh yeah,
forever.
yeah. I mean, I still talk to my systems engineer, a couple of times a year, and we stay in touch. But I say, it's one of those. It's an industry where there's lots of acquaintances.
Yeah.
And but when you have good friends, they're really good friends. I think it's generally quite a friendly industry. I think once you reach a certain point in your career, you find your level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it feels like a long time ago now.
5 years. We're looking at 5 years. It's certainly, it's weird and it feels like a long time, but also, I mean, just for me thinking 2017 doesn't seem that long ago, but then it also does feel like a really long time ago, what with everything that's happened over the last few years.
Well, that's it. I mean, we've just lost nearly 2 years now, haven't we?
Yeah. Just gone. How's that downtime been for you?
You know, I was quite lucky because we were one of the last tours to finish in hang on, let's get this, be March 20, that's right. Mm-hmm. March 20. I was on Halsey and we were at we did the last show at the Manchester Arena. I think we were the last act to play there before the full lockdown. And then I think after that there was like the Stereophonics in Cardiff and things like that. But you know, it was definitely coming in like a wave, and you know, it was quite fearful in the camp and what was going to happen. But that was literally the last day of that leg of the tour, and then we were due to go out in the summer. And I said, oh well, you know, we'll probably still be going. So you know, we all went home, and I went home and got into DIY and building my house and things like that. So for like everybody, the first lockdown was like, it was great fun. You know, it's like got my house fixed up.
That's what I should have been doing.
You know, and you know, fortunately, I was lucky to be working for an artist like that who, you know, they saw me through. You know, they saw me through for a period of time until the following Christmas. So I was kind of okay. But then, obviously, I actually think it's, as the pandemic went on, I think it just became more and more draining because you're going, come on, when's this going to start? When's this going to start? And, you know, we were supposed to, then they postponed that tour to the following, so that would have been 21.
Yeah.
And then obviously we got into 21 and they went, nah, it's already going bad. So they cancelled. Well, they didn't just postpone, they cancelled the whole thing. That was the end of that world tour. They just basically chopped the whole thing and that was the end of that. So, you know, basically I was a ship that had been cast off and was floating around the ocean thinking, okay, what are we going to do? And I picked up a few sort of bits of TV and things like that, and did some did something for Sky Arts, and did live stream from the O2, which went really, really well, and recorded and mixed that. You know, it wasn't massive. You know, it was enough to kind of keep me going and surviving. Then at the back end of last year, I went out for nearly 4 months with a chap called Porter Robinson. Which was actually a good friend of mine who was the production manager, said, are you up for this? I went, yeah, I'll do it. And actually it was good fun. It was a nice 4 months. Yeah. I think it's very much changing all the time at the moment. I think there's, you know, as I said to you before, I think there's, you know, I used to fly a lot from here, all my work's in America, but that hasn't been obviously what it was because, you know, cost of living, the cost of everything's gone up, flights, everything this, that, and it has a knock-on effect to the business. You know, in the last couple of months I've been doing broadcast, I've been doing BBC drama.
Right, okay.
Yeah, recording BBC drama, which actually I've really enjoyed. Really had a good time.
Well, it's good, I mean, to be able to do anything during all this that's been going on, you know, it's been a really, really difficult couple of years, and you know, it looks like the sort of the seeds of you know, kind of growth, if that's what they're shooting through.
I think so. I think so. I mean, I think that, you know, America's obviously ahead of the curve, and you know, there is stuff out for sure. There is, but I think a lot of that is. There's a lot of stuff out that was cancellation and just, you know, repeat business. So they, you know, a lot of those were already crewed up. Yeah. And I think sort of like what I call the big sort of A-list pop tours are still holding off, but you know, they are going to go out, and I think they'll probably start to go out by the summer and the fall time. I think it'll start to happen. I think we'll see a lot of change from the summer months onwards. Yeah. And that's my gut instinct.
Well, let's hope so. Fingers crossed. I mean, you know, that's what we basically essentially want the world to go back to normal, don't we? But I mean, I don't know when that's going to happen or if that's going to happen.
We don't know what normal is.
We don't know. Yeah, it is, you know, as it's been said to painstakingly dull amounts now. This is the new normal, or whatever it is you want to call it. But normally we end by asking our guests the best and worst day of their career. I think we'll skip the worst day. But do you have a single, if you can pick a single day, a single gig, a single moment from your career where you looked out and thought, bloody hell, this is a great thing to be doing. This is what I want to be doing. I'm so glad I do this. Is there one moment, one memory you have that you really look back on with that level of fondness?
Probably the worst day was also one of the best days.
Really?
Yeah. Funny enough, when I looked out from, mixing that show, the one that Manchester, you sit there going, yeah, we do this for a good reason, and this, even though it had been based on a bad event, it was still a good day to try and celebrate the better, if that makes sense. So, yeah, probably a strange answer, that one.
It is, but it isn't, because it's a cliche to say the healing power of music, and music that means so much to people and can unite people, but they're cliches because they're true, aren't they? The music is really, really important. It's never just music. People say, oh, it's just music. It's not. It's really important to people, and I think in an event like that, to have those people come back and to show that kind of solidarity and for people to do that, I think it was a really kind of beautiful, triumphant thing. And yeah, like I say, even as someone who I can't even sit here and pretend like I was huge fans of everyone who played that day. I did still watch it on telly, and I did still think, what a lovely, beautiful, poignant event this is. Exactly,
and you have to, out of all those horrible negatives, you got to take a positive as well. You have to, otherwise we don't move on. Yeah, as I say, probably seems like a strange answer, but there is sort of like a reason for it in there.
Makes sense. Si, thanks very much for coming on.
No worries.
Thank you for being so open with your answers as well. Obviously, like we say, it can't be easy to think about that or talk about that, and but I'm glad that like you say, you've taken the positive from it, so very much appreciated. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
There you go. Once again, I want to say a really big thank you to Si for coming on the show and chatting to us and being so open and so candid, and really opening himself up to something which you can't imagine ever having to go through. So thank you, Si, for coming on. Thank you for chatting to us. It was lovely to talk to you, and yeah, I've got an incredible amount of admiration for the events that took place and your reaction to them. So anyway, thank you very much as well for you for listening to the show. If you've made it this far, we are going to try and be putting these out regularly, a lot more regularly than we have done previously, and so we will be back very soon with another guest from the world of music. In the meantime, if you'd like to go over to our Facebook or Instagram, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, just as We Are the Road Crew Podcast. Also, we are at Road Crew Pod on Twitter as well, if you would like to give us a follow on there. And also, if you don't mind, then leave a little review wherever you, or some stars. You can leave a 5-star review on the iTunes or the Spotify. You can even write a little review as well. Do give it 5. I don't want to be a stickler about it, but obviously you're not paying for this, are you? So if you give it anything less than 5, it's not really very nice, is it? That's kind of like slapping your granny when she gives you a pair of socks at Christmas and saying this is an awful present. You wouldn't do that, and so I don't really think you should be so mean to give us anything other than a 5. If you don't think it's worth a 5, probably just don't say anything. But there you go. That's just how I live my life personally. But you do what you want, but also just give us a 5-star review. Thanks very much anyway, but we appreciate any reviews that come in, and we'll be back, as I said, another time with another guest from the world of music. Thanks again to Si, and I hope to see you very, very soon.